Okay, we're looking at a paired passage, and we need to decide how the authors of text 2 would respond to the research discussed in text 1. So this is a broad claim type question. Let's read text 1. Public policy researcher Fowler studied the history of elections in Australia, a country that requires citizens to vote. So they require citizens to vote. It's not like the US where you have to register to vote voluntarily. Fowler argues that requiring citizens to vote leads to a significant increase in voters, okay, I bet it does, who would otherwise not have time or motivation to vote. Thus, here's his claim, election results in countries that require citizens to vote better reflect the preferences of the country as a whole. So if you require citizens to vote, the results basically reflect the preferences of the whole. So that's better, therefore. Okay, that seems to be a reasonable assessment, possibly. I assume text 2 is going to disagree, though. Let's see. Governments in democratic countries function better when more people vote. So they actually agree to that point. However, of course, we got the contrast. Forcing people to vote may have negative consequences. So forcing people to vote, like they do in Australia in text 1, is negative consequences. Such and such studied what happens when a country requires its citizens to vote. They found that when people feel forced to vote, they tend to spend less time looking for information about their choices when voting. As a result, here's their claim, votes from these voters may not reflect their actual preferences. Remember, up above, they said when everybody's forced to vote, it reflects the preferences of the country as a whole. So text 2 disagrees with that. So let's see what the correct answer would be. It's going to be they disagree with basically text 1. Only countries of a certain population size should implement. No, it's not about population size or a certain size. That's not the right answer. Not the right idea. That's essentially irrelevant to the question at hand, the research. People who are forced to vote are likely to become politically engaged in other ways. Where in the text did it say that? Such as volunteering or running for office? No, it said nothing about that. That is simply not in the passage at all. C, requiring people to vote does not necessarily lead to election outcomes that better represent the preferences of the country as a whole. That's what the authors of text 2 say. When you force people to vote, it doesn't reflect their preferences. So it won't, in Australia's case, when you force people to vote, reflect the preferences of the country as a whole, because it doesn't reflect people's preferences at all. C is going to be the right answer. I'll quick check D. Countries that require voting must also make the process of voting easier for their citizens. Again, that's an idea that's just simply not in the passage. It's not covered in the text. Okay, we've got a paired passage here. In this case, both authors would agree. So we have an authors agree statement. What would they agree on? So probably they're going to disagree overall, but agree on some minor point. And we'll figure out what that is. So text 1. Dance choreographer Alvin Ailey's deep admiration for jazz music can most clearly be felt in the rhythms and beats his works were set to. Okay, so rhythms and beats are a clear definition of Ailey's work. Ailey collaborated with some of the greatest jazz legends, Charles Mingus, Charlie Parker, and perhaps his favorite, Duke Ellington. With his choice of music, Ailey helped bring jazz to life for audiences. Okay, so he was clearly an excellent jazz choreographer, and he worked with the rhythms and beats of jazz. Text 2. Jazz is present throughout Ailey's work. So again, we're focused on jazz here in Ailey, but it's most visible in Ailey's approach to choreography. Okay, well, yeah, he's a choreographer here. Ailey often incorporated improvisation, a signature characteristic of jazz music, in his work. So wait, up above it said the most defining character of his jazz is the rhythms and beats of his work. Here it says it's basically the choreography and the improvisation in his work. When managing his dance company, Ailey rarely forced his dancers to an exact set of specific moves. Instead, he encouraged his dancers to let their own skills and experiences shape their performance as jazz musicians do. Okay, so we've got two different sort of main theses about what makes Ailey great, or what his work's about, or what defines it, really. They kind of disagree. What do they agree on? Well, they agree on all throughout jazz. He's all about jazz. He's a choreographer in text 1 and text 2. So let's see if an answer picks up on that. A, dancers who worked with Ailey greatly appreciated his supportive approach. I have no idea. That's not in the text. I can't get in the head of dancers that worked with him. That's simply not something we can answer with any evidence from the text. B, Ailey's work was strongly influenced by jazz. That's it. It sure was. Both authors would definitely agree with that. C, audiences were mostly unfamiliar with the jazz music. No, that's not true at all. Number one, that's not in the text. And it does say he's very famous. So, in fact, that's probably not the case. Ailey blended multiple genres of music together when choreographing dance pieces. Well, maybe, but it doesn't really say that, because this text is all about jazz, which is why they both agree Ailey's work was strongly influenced by jazz. B is correct. Okay, we've got another paired passage. And what would text 2 say about the interpretation presented in the underlined portion of text 1? So we have a focused or specific claim in the underlined portion of text 1. We have to see what text 2 would say about that. So text 1, historians studying pre-Inca Peru have looked to ceramic vessels to understand daily life among the Moche people. These mold-made sculptures present plants, animals, and human faces in precise ways. Okay, that's interesting. Vessels representing human faces are so detailed that scholars have interpreted facial markings to represent scars and other skin irregularities. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So when they did their, sculpting or their artwork, they were able to represent like acne or things like that, like scars, like specific facial markings. Okay, that's interesting. I think I understand what they mean now. Some historians have even used these objects to identify potential skin disease that may have afflicted people. Okay, text 2. I'm going to guess they're going to disagree, because most texts do disagree. Art historian and archaeologist Trevor has argued that the interpretation of Moche portrait vessels as hyper-realistic, which is exactly what text 1 is saying, portrayals of identifiable people, with scars and other markings they can be identified. This is exactly about text 1, may inadvertently disregard the creativity of the object's creators. Okay, here it is. May inadvertently disregard the creativity. So basically she's saying they're making a mistake. Moche ceramic vessels, Trevor argues, are artworks in which sculptors could free their imagination using realistic objects and people around them as inspiration to explore more abstract concepts. So the detailed in there is actually artists using their imagination to explore abstract ideas and concepts. It's not representations of scars and identifiable things on people's faces. Let's see what answer matches that. A, depictions of humans are significantly more realistic than depictions of plants. No, there's no comparison here. That's a typical false comparison, which is another typical wrong answer choice on the exam that is not even addressed in the passage. B, it is likely that some depictions of human faces with extensive markings are intended to portray the same historical individual. No, there's nothing, they just said they're precise, nothing about a particular individual, let alone a historical individual. That is simply not evidenced in the text. C, some vessels may have been damaged during their excavation. Yes, so what? That's not what this is about. That's not right. That's irrelevant. D, markings on depictions of human faces are not necessarily intended to portray particular details, like scars, for example, about the physical appearance of individuals. This is exactly right. D is the correct answer. The passages are in opposition.